The desert highway smelled of melting asphalt and desperation. When Arthur pulled his rusty pickup behind the smoking Mercedes, he didn't see a billionaire. He just saw another idiot stranded on Route 93. He only stopped because his daughter was watching. He had no idea this breakdown would fix everything. It was the kind of heat that made your teeth ache. The air over the cracked Nevada asphalt warped and rippled like cheap glass. Inside Arthur's 2004 Ford F-15. Oh, the air conditioning had died 3 summers ago. He drove with the windows down, leaning his left elbow on the doorframe, letting the furnace wind dry the sweat into salt on his neck. In the passenger seat, his 7-year-old daughter Chloe was asleep. Her cheek was pressed against the rattling window hair glued to her forehead with perspiration. Arthur glanced at her, feeling that familiar heavy twist in his gut. It wasn't a heroic feeling. It was guilt. Pure, uncut, working-class guilt. He had exactly $42 in his checking account, a mortgage that was 2 months past due, and a fridge holding nothing but half a gallon of milk and some generic brand American cheese. Ahead, the shimmering mirage on the road broke. A shape materialized on the shoulder. It was a car. Black low to the ground and wildly expensive. A Mercedes AMG GT covered in a thin film of pale desert dust. The hood was popped, venting a thick plume of gray steam into the unforgiving sky. Beside it stood a woman. Arthur's foot instinctively hovered over the brake, but his brain screamed at him to keep going. Keep driving. You don't have the time. You don't have the energy. He worked 12-hour shifts at the distribution center. His knuckles were permanently stained with grease. His lower back felt like a compressed accordion, and he just wanted to get his kid home to a fan and a lukewarm bath. But Chloe stirred. She blinked against the glaring sun, rubbing her eyes with a dirty fist. "Dad, the car's smoking." "I see it, bug," Arthur grunted, keeping his eyes forward. "Is she okay? She looks mad." Arthur looked in the rearview mirror. The woman had kicked the front tire of the 6-figure machine. He sighed. A long, rattling exhalation that tasted like stale coffee and defeat. He eased the truck onto the gravel shoulder, the worn tires crunching to a halt a few yards behind the Mercedes. "Stay in the truck, Chloe. Don't unbuckle." Arthur stepped out. The heat hit him like a physical blow. He walked toward the woman, his boots scuffing the dirt. She spun around as he approached. Her posture immediately went rigid, defensive. She was dressed like she had taken a wrong turn out of a Manhattan skyscraper, a tailored charcoal blazer, a silk cream blouse clinging to her skin with sweat and dark slacks. Her heels were sinking into the soft dirt. Vivian didn't like being caught off guard. For the last 5 years since she took over the CEO role at her father's logistics empire, she had controlled every variable in her life. She was stranded in the middle of nowhere because she had fired her driver in a fit of exhaustion, demanding to drive herself from Las Vegas to Phoenix, just to feel something other than the suffocating hum of corporate sycophants. Now she felt something. Unmitigated irritation. She sized Arthur up. Faded Levi's, a gray T-shirt with a grease stain near the hem, a ball cap pulled low over tired, dark eyes. He didn't smile. "I have a," Vivian said, her voice sharp, a preemptive strike. "They're on their way." Arthur stopped a few feet away. He looked at her, then looked at the dead zone on his cheap prepaid phone. "No, they aren't. There's no cell service out here for another 30 miles. You're talking to a dead brick." Vivian frowned instinctively, looking down at her iPhone. He was right. "I sent a text an hour ago. Didn't go through, Arthur said flatly. He didn't offer a polite introduction. He just walked past her and peered under the open hood. The smell of evaporated ethylene glycol was overpowering, sweet chemical and choking. He coughed, waving the steam away. "Don't touch that," Vivian snapped. She hated when men assumed she needed a savior. "It's a specialized engine. You'll void the warranty." Arthur snorted. It was a harsh scraping sound. "Lady, your warranty doesn't mean much when you're frying the block. You blew a radiator hose. See that?" He pointed a callous, thick finger at a rubber tube split cleanly down the middle, dripping neon green fluid onto the scorched earth. "Probably dried out from sitting in a climate-controlled garage too long. Then you drove it through an oven." Vivian crossed her arms. Her silk shirt was sticking to her back. She felt disgusting, helpless, and fiercely angry about it. "So what do you suggest? You happen to have a spare Mercedes part in your truck?" She eyed his rusted Ford with undisguised skepticism. Arthur looked at her. Really looked at her. Her makeup was flawless, though slightly melted. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, scanning him for an angle. He knew that look. It was the look upper management gave the warehouse guys right before a layoff. "No," Arthur said, his tone dropping an octave devoid of any customer service warmth. "But I have duct tape, a hose clamp, and 2 jugs of distilled water. It'll hold for 20 miles until we hit Rusty's. It's a diner and a mechanic shop. You can use their landline to call your flatbed." He didn't wait for her permission. Arthur turned his back on her, walking to his truck. He rummaged in the toolbox, grabbing the supplies. Vivian watched him. He didn't pander. He didn't leer. He treated her with the exact same level of annoyance she usually reserved for incompetent board members. It was disorienting. Arthur returned, leaned over the hot engine block, and got to work. His forearms flexed as he wrestled the heavy rubber hose. He worked in silence, sweat dripping from his chin onto the hot metal, hissing as it evaporated. The sharp, toxic smell of coolant mixed with the scent of his cheap deodorant and the raw dust of the desert. 10 minutes later, he tightened the metal clamp with a screwdriver and backed away. Wiping his greasy hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket, he unscrewed the radiator cap with the rag, wincing as a final gasp of pressurized steam shot out, then poured the water in. "Start it," he ordered. Vivian hesitated, then climbed into the driver's seat. She pressed the ignition. The engine roared to life. No steam. She stepped out, reaching for the designer leather bag resting on the passenger seat. She pulled out a sleek, minimalist wallet. "How much do I owe you for the tape?" "I don't want your money," Arthur said, throwing the empty plastic jugs into the back of his truck. "Don't be ridiculous," Vivian countered, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. "I pay for services rendered. It's how the world works." Arthur walked up to her. He was taller than her by several inches, and up close she could see the dark bags under his eyes. He didn't look at the money. He looked at her hands, soft and manicured, holding the bill. "I used about $2 worth of tape and $4 worth of water," Arthur said quietly. "Keep your money. Just follow me to the diner. If you push this car over 60, that clamp will snap and you'll be walking. Don't ride my bumper." He turned and walked away. Vivian stood there, the $100 bill fluttering slightly in the dry wind, feeling a strange, hollow sensation in her chest. For the first time in years, someone had just told her no. The sign for Rusty's Diner was missing the T and the S, leaving it to glow a sickly neon red as Ross Y Diner. The parking lot was gravel cratered with potholes. Arthur's truck rattled into a spot near the ice machine. The Mercedes glided in beside it, looking like a spaceship that had crash-landed in a junkyard. Arthur killed the engine and looked at Chloe. "All right, Bug. Let's go get some air conditioning." "And fries?" Chloe asked, unbuckling her seatbelt with a frantic metallic click. Arthur swallowed hard. Fries were an extra $3. He did the mental math. "Yeah, and fries." They walked inside. The diner smelled heavily of old fryer oil, pine sol, and burnt coffee. The vinyl booths were a faded, cracked maroon mended with strips of black tape. A ceiling fan wobbled dangerously overhead, pushing the hot air in slow, lazy circles. Vivian walked in 30 seconds behind them. She paused in the doorway. The fluorescent lights hummed with a grating electrical buzz. A trucker in the corner looked up from his meatloaf, stared at her legs, and went back to chewing. She felt entirely out of her element. She usually dined in rooms where the lighting was curated and the menus lacked prices. She saw Arthur slide into a booth near the back. He was wiping down the table with a paper napkin before letting his daughter sit. Vivian walked over to the counter, asked the bored-looking waitress for the phone, and dialed her roadside assistance. They told her it would be 3 hours. 3 hours. She hung up the sticky plastic receiver and looked around. The diner offered nothing but awful coffee in isolation. She looked toward Arthur's booth. He had a glass of ice water. The little girl was coloring on a placemat with a stubby, broken crayon. Vivian walked over. She didn't ask for permission. She slid into the booth directly across from Arthur. Arthur looked up, his jaw tightening. "Tow truck on the way." 3 hours, Vivian said. She placed her phone on the cracked Formica table. It looked absurdly sleek against the grime. "I owe you. Again." "You don't owe me anything. You made it. Transaction complete." Arthur took a sip of his water. He wasn't trying to be rude, but he had no bandwidth for small talk with a woman who wore watches that cost more than his house. "I'm Vivian," she said, extending a hand. Arthur stared at it for a second. He wiped his own hand on his jeans before shaking hers. His palm was rough, calloused, like sandpaper. Her skin was incredibly soft. "Arthur, this is Chloe." Chloe looked up from her coloring. "I like your shiny shirt." Vivian blinked, taken aback. She wasn't used to children. They were chaotic variables. "Thank you. It's silk." The waitress sauntered over, popping her gum. "What can I get you?" "Grilled cheese for the kid. Extra fries," Arthur said, not looking at the menu. "And for you, hon." "Just black coffee." Vivian frowned. She looked at Arthur's hollow cheeks. "You're not eating?" "Not hungry," Arthur lied. His stomach gave a traitorous hollow growl right as the words left his mouth. Vivian caught it. She looked at the waitress. "Bring him a cheeseburger, and I'll take a club sandwich. Put it all on one check. I'm paying." "No, you're not." Arthur snapped, his voice low but sharp. The pride in his chest flared up hot and ugly. "Cancel the burger. I pay for my own." Vivian met his gaze. Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, in boardrooms flickered with a quiet intensity. She recognized the look of a cornered animal. She saw it in competitors all the time, but this was different. This wasn't corporate pride. This was survival pride. "Arthur," she said softly, leaning forward. The smell of her perfume, something subtle. Cedar and vanilla momentarily masked the scent of the stale fryer oil. "You saved my engine. I am stranded here for 3 hours. If you let me buy you a $9 burger, I will feel slightly less in your debt, and it will keep me from going insane sitting by myself at the counter. Consider it a favor to me." Arthur stared at her. He saw the tension in her jaw, the way her expensive clothes were covered in a fine layer of dust. She was miserable. He exhaled slowly. "Fine, but I'm not making conversation." "Deal." The food arrived fast. Arthur ate the burger with a mechanical efficiency, trying not to look like he was starving. Vivian barely touched her sandwich. She watched him. She watched how he meticulously scraped the slightly burnt edges off Chloe's grilled cheese with a butter knife before sliding the plate toward her. She watched how he gave Chloe the crispiest fries from his own basket without a word. "What do you do, Arthur?" Vivian asked, breaking the silence despite their deal. Arthur wiped his mouth with a cheap, scratchy napkin. "I thought we weren't talking." "I lied. I'm a CEO. I do that sometimes," she said dryly. Arthur let out a short, surprised bark of a laugh. It changed his entire face, softening the hard lines around his mouth. CEO of what entitlement? Vivian didn't flinch. Logistics, supply chain management, moving things from point A to point B. She didn't mention it was a multi-billion-dollar global operation. "I move things too," Arthur said, leaning back against the sticky vinyl. "Warehouse out in Henderson. Before that, the copper mill before it shut down. Just lifting heavy things until my back eventually gives out." "It doesn't bother you?" Vivian asked, genuinely curious. "The repetition bother me." Arthur looked at her like she was an alien. He gestured to Chloe, who was happily dipping a fry in a massive puddle of ketchup. "It keeps the lights on, mostly. You don't get to be bothered when you have a mouth to feed. You just get to work." Vivian felt a strange cold knot in her stomach. 2 days ago, she had signed off on a restructuring plan that eliminated 300 warehouse jobs in Ohio to bump the quarterly margins by 0.2%. It had been numbers on a spreadsheet. Now sitting across from a man who had grease stained deep into his cuticles, a man who refused to eat so his kid could have fries, the numbers suddenly had a face. And the face was tired. "What about you?" Arthur asked, interrupting her thoughts. "Why are you driving 150 grand through the desert by yourself? You look like you usually have people to do that for you." "I do," Vivian said quietly. She looked down at her water glass, tracing the condensation with a perfectly manicured nail. "But sometimes when you have people doing everything for you, you forget how to do anything for yourself. I just wanted to see if I still could." "Could what?" "Steer," she whispered. Arthur studied her. The cynicism that usually shielded him felt suddenly heavy. He saw the contradictions in her, the sharp, expensive edges hiding a profound, hollow exhaustion. She wasn't just an entitled rich woman. She was trapped in her own way, just like he was. "Well," Arthur said softly, his voice losing its rough edge, "you steered yourself straight into a busted radiator." "I did," Vivian said, and for the first time all day, a small, genuine smile touched the corner of her lips. Outside, a heavy diesel engine rumbled as a flatbed tow truck finally pulled into the gravel lot, its amber lights flashing against the darkening desert sky. The amber lights of the tow truck sliced through the diner's dusty windows, painting the vinyl booths in harsh rotating flashes of orange. Vivian watched the heavy diesel rig groan to a halt. The spell of the quiet diner snapped, replaced by the grating reality of logistics and logistics-related delays. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her slacks. The silk blouse was permanently ruined, stained with sweat and dessert dust. She didn't care. "I guess that's my ride," Vivian said. Arthur didn't stand. He just nodded, his hands wrapped around the sweating glass of ice water. "Driver will probably take you as far as Kingman. You can get a rental car there. Try not to blow the radiator on that one." It was a dry attempt at humor, but his voice was flat exhausted. The brief moment of connection they'd shared over a $9 burger was already dissolving, retreating behind the thick, invisible wall of their respective tax brackets. Vivian reached into her bag. She bypassed the wallet and pulled out a heavy embossed business card. The cardstock was thick enough to cut glass. She slid it across the sticky table. It stopped against the base of Arthur's water glass. "If you ever need anything," Vivian said, her voice tight, "a reference, a job, whatever, call the number on the back. It goes straight to me, not an assistant." Arthur looked at the card. It read, Vivian Hayes, Chief Executive Officer, Hayes Global Transport. He didn't touch it. He just looked from the card to her eyes. "Have a safe trip, Vivian." She wanted him to pick it up. She wanted some acknowledgement that this encounter meant something, that she wasn't just another helpless idiot in a broken luxury car. But Arthur just sat there guarding his daughter's half-eaten plate of fries, his jaw set in a hard, proud line. Vivian turned and walked out into the suffocating night air. When the tow truck finally lumbered away, carrying the crippled Mercedes on its flatbed, Arthur reached across the table. He picked up the card. The raised lettering felt foreign against his calloused thumb. He stared at it for 3 seconds before sliding it into the front pocket of his jeans. It sat there, a tiny, heavy square of an alternate universe pressing against his thigh. The next morning hit Arthur like a baseball bat to the spine. His alarm screamed at 4:30 a.m. His apartment, a cramped 2-bedroom in Henderson, with a window AC unit that rattled like a dying lawnmower, smelled of stale air and cheap detergent. He rolled out of bed, his lower back popping in 3 distinct agonizing places. He shuffled to the kitchen, poured black coffee into a battered thermos, and packed a lunch he wouldn't actually eat. He peeked into Chloe's room. She was sprawled across her twin bed, clutching a stuffed rabbit that was missing an ear. The guilt flared again, hot and familiar in his chest. He was leaving her with Mrs. Gable downstairs again. Another 10-hour shift. Another day of not being there. By 6 a.m., Arthur was in the belly of the beast. The Henderson Fulfillment Center was a monstrous corrugated steel cavern that spanned 5 football fields. The air tasted of cardboard dust, exhaust fumes, and ozone. Forklifts shrieked as they reversed their backup alarms, piercing the constant low-frequency hum of the conveyor belts. Arthur's job was loading palletized freight onto outbound trailers. It was brutal, mind-numbing labor. Lift pivot stack, lift pivot stack. By noon, the sweat had soaked through his gray shirt, mingling with the grease that seemed permanently embedded in his skin. His knuckles throbbed. Every time he reached into his pocket for a box cutter, his fingers brushed against the thick, stiff edges of Vivian's business card. It felt like a joke. Hayes Global Transport. He was a cog in a machine just like hers. 300 miles away, Vivian was sitting in a room where the air was filtered, chilled to exactly 68 degrees, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive espresso. The boardroom table was a slab of reclaimed mahogany. Around it sat 12 men and women in tailored suits pointing laser pens at a projection screen displaying third-quarter projections. By automating the sorting hubs in the Midwest corridor, a vice president named Richard droned on, tapping the screen. We can eliminate roughly 400 redundant positions. The initial severance outlay is heavy, but the ROI over the next 18 months is exceptional. Vivian stared at the graph, a jagged blue line climbing upward. Yesterday, that line was just a metric. Today, all she could see was Arthur's rough sandpaper palm pushing a plate of crispy fries toward a 7-year-old girl because he couldn't afford a meal for himself. Redundant positions, Vivian interrupted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. Richard paused his laser pointer, trembling slightly. "Excuse me, you said redundant positions." Vivian leaned forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany. "You mean people. 400 people with mortgages, light bills, and kids who eat grilled cheese in shitty diners." The room went dead silent. The board members exchanged nervous, sideways glances. Vivian Hayes didn't do sentimentality. She was the woman who had liquidated an entire trucking subsidiary 2 years ago without blinking. "Vivian," the CFO said gently, as if speaking to a volatile patient, "we are simply streamlining the supply chain. It's necessary for shareholder value." "Show me the Henderson facility," Vivian snapped, ignoring him. She opened her laptop. "Henderson, Nevada." Richard blinked. "That's a third-party contracted site. We don't directly manage the floor personnel there. We just lease the space and—" "I don't care," Vivian typed furiously. "Pull up the operational metrics now." They projected the data. Vivian scanned the numbers. The Henderson facility was running at 110% capacity. The turnover rate for floor workers was astronomical, 60% in the last 6 months. "Why is the turnover so high?" she demanded. "It's manual loading," Richard said defensively. "High physical attrition. It's standard for that sector." High physical attrition. Her stomach twisted. It meant broken backs. It meant men like Arthur grinding their joints into dust to keep the shipping quotas green on a chart in a room they would never be allowed to enter. Vivian slammed her laptop shut. The sharp crack made 3 executives flinch. "Halt the Midwest automation. Reroute the capital expenditure budget. I want a full audit of our contracted warehouse wages and maintenance protocols, starting with Henderson." "Oh, Vivian, you can't just I am the CEO, Richard. Watch me." She stood up, grabbing her bag. "Meeting adjourned. Cancel my afternoon." It took Vivian 3 days to find him. It wasn't hard once she demanded the employee manifest from the Henderson Contracting Agency. Arthur Pendleton, age 34, shift supervisor. She didn't call him. She knew if she called, he would hang up. He was a man made of defensive walls, and she was the embodiment of everything he had to defend himself against. Instead, she drove. Not the repaired Mercedes. She rented a nondescript gray sedan, wanting to shed the armor of her wealth. She pulled into the Henderson warehouse parking lot at 4:45 p.m. The asphalt was cracked and weeping tar under the late afternoon sun. Chain-link fences topped with razor wire surrounded the perimeter. The smell of diesel exhaust was suffocating. At 5:05 p.m., the shift doors rolled open. A flood of exhausted people spilled out into the heat. They moved with a collective, heavy-footed, drag shoulders, slumped eyes fixed on the pavement. Vivian spotted Arthur instantly. He was walking toward the same rusted 2004 Ford F-150. He looked worse than he had at the diner. His face was pale beneath a layer of grime, and he favored his left leg, walking with a subtle, painful limp. Vivian stepped out of the sedan and intercepted him just as he was fishing his keys from his pocket. "Arthur!" He stopped. His head snapped up. When he saw her standing there in a simple white blouse and dark jeans, his brow furrowed in deep, genuine confusion. Then the confusion hardened into something darker. Suspicion. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice rough, lacking any of the hesitant camaraderie they'd shared over coffee. "I needed to talk to you," Vivian said, stepping closer. The heat radiating from his truck engine was intense. "You drove back to the desert to talk to me." Arthur looked around the bleak parking lot. "I told you transaction complete. You don't owe me." "It's not about the car, Arthur. It's about this." She gestured to the massive steel building behind them. "I know who you work for. You work for a subcontractor that manages freight for Hayes Global Transport." Arthur froze. His hand tightened around his keys, the jagged metal digging into his palm. He looked at her, really looked at her, connecting the dots. The expensive clothes, the arrogance, the business card he had thrown in his junk drawer. Hayes Global Transport. "You," Arthur said the word dripping with sudden venomous clarity. "You own this." "I am the CEO of the parent company, yes," Vivian said, keeping her voice steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Arthur let out a harsh, bitter laugh. He turned away from her, unlocking his truck door with a violent twist of his wrist. "Unbelievable. The universe has a sick sense of humor." "Arthur, listen to me." "No, you listen to me." Arthur spun back around, slamming the truck door shut with a force that made the whole vehicle rattle. He closed the distance between them, pointing a calloused finger at her chest. "You have any idea what goes on in that metal box?" The temperature hit 112 on the floor today. 2 guys passed out. We get penalized if we take more than 5 minutes to drink water. And you're the one sitting in an air-conditioned tower cashing the checks. "I didn't know the ground conditions were this bad," Vivian said, hating how weak, how utterly corporate the excuse sounded. "The contractors hide the operational realities." "Save the boardroom bullshit," Arthur snarled. His eyes were blazing. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by raw, untethered rage. "You didn't know because you didn't care to look. You only looked because your precious sports car broke down and a peasant had to tape it back together." Vivian swallowed hard. The truth of his words stung like a physical slap. She didn't flinch. She stood her ground, meeting his furious gaze. "You're right, I didn't look. But I'm looking now." "Great. Do you want a medal?" Arthur mocked, his chest heaving. "Go back to your penthouse, Vivian. Tell yourself you came down to the slums and showed some empathy. Clear your conscience. I have to go pick up my kid." He reached for the door handle again. "I want to give you a job," Vivian blurted out. Arthur stopped. He didn't turn around. His knuckles were white against the rusted door handle. "I already have a job. You pay me $18 an hour to destroy my spine." "Not this job," Vivian said, her voice urgent. "I reviewed your file. Before the copper mill, you were an auto mechanic. You have 6 ASE certifications. You held a shop manager title for 4 years before the economy tanked in 2008. Arthur slowly turned his head. "You dug into my employment history. I am overhauling the entire regional fleet maintenance division." Vivian pushed forward, ignoring his glare. "Right now, it's run by people who read spreadsheets, not engines. They buy cheap parts that fail They ignore driver safety reports, and they bleed money because they don't know how to turn a wrench. I need a director of fleet operations for the Southwest Corridor. Someone who actually knows what happens when a radiator hose blows in the desert. Arthur stared at her. The anger in his face fractured, replaced by a jarring sense of disbelief. Director of Fleet Operations. Are you out of your mind? I don't wear a suit. I don't go to meetings. I don't need a suit. I need someone who won't lie to me, Vivian said, stepping closer. The starting salary is $120,000 a year. Full benefits. Comprehensive health care for you and Chloe. Arthur physically swayed. The number hit him like a shockwave. $120,000. It was more money than he had ever seen in a decade. It meant a house. It meant a backyard. It meant Chloe never having to eat another burnt grilled cheese or wear second-hand shoes that pinched her toes. But his pride, that thick, stubborn armor that had kept him alive for 34 years, screamed at him to reject it. It felt like a payout, a billionaire's charity project to soothe her own guilt. I don't want your charity, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. It's not charity. Vivian fired back, matching his intensity. It's entirely selfish. My current fleet director is a moron who is costing me millions in delayed shipments and broken trucks. You fixed a foreign specialized engine with duct tape and a clamp, and it held for 100 miles. I need that kind of practical ingenuity. You'd be working 60-hour weeks. You'd be traveling to depots across 3 states. You'll probably hate me half the time. It is a brutal job, Arthur, but it's yours if you want it. She reached into her bag, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and slapped it onto the hood of his truck. The offer letter's in there, along with a non-disclosure agreement and the medical benefits package. Read it. Throw it away. It's up to you. Vivian didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked back to her rented sedan. She climbed in, started the engine, and drove away, leaving Arthur alone in the stifling parking lot, staring at the envelope as if it were a bomb waiting to detonate. The diner smelled exactly the same. Fryer grease, pine sol, and defeat. 2 weeks had passed. Vivian sat in the same cracked vinyl booth, nursing a cup of black coffee that tasted like battery acid. She checked her watch. 7:15 p.m. The door jingled. Arthur walked in. He wasn't wearing his grease-stained gray shirt. He wore a clean, dark blue button-down tucked into a pair of unfrayed jeans. He still wore his work boots, and his hair was still slightly unruly, but the heavy, suffocating cloud of exhaustion that usually followed him seemed to have lifted just a fraction. He didn't have Chloe with him. He walked to the booth and slid in across from Vivian. He placed the manila envelope on the table between them. It was crumpled at the edges, bearing the physical evidence of a man who had paced his tiny apartment for 14 nights, staring at the paperwork, fighting a war between his pride and his daughter's future. "You read it?" Vivian asked, keeping her tone neutral. "I read it," Arthur said. He tapped the envelope with his index finger. "The health care kicks in on day 1. Day 1, Vivian confirmed. 0 deductible for dependents." Arthur looked down at the table. He traced a deep scratch in the formica. The silence stretched heavy and complicated. "I spent my whole life hating people like you," Arthur said softly, not looking up. "People who hold the strings. You sit up there, and you don't even know when you're suffocating us. You just look at the numbers." "I know," Vivian said. She didn't offer a defense. There was no defense. It's easy to lose your humanity when you never have to look it in the eye. Arthur finally looked up. His dark eyes locked onto hers. The cynicism was still there, but the absolute hostility had burned away, leaving something vulnerable in its wake. If I take this, I do it my way. If a truck isn't safe, I ground it. I don't care what the shipping quota is. I don't care if it pisses off the board. You want me to run the fleet. I run it for the drivers, not the shareholders. Vivian felt a small, genuine smile break across her face. It felt entirely unfamiliar. That is exactly what I am paying you to do, Arthur. Fight me when I'm wrong. Arthur stared at her for a long moment. He saw the bags under her eyes, the tight set of her jaw. She was a billionaire. She lived in a different stratosphere. But she was just as trapped by her world as he was by his. They were both suffocating. They just breathed different air. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cheap plastic pen. He clicked it. The sound was sharp in the quiet diner. He pulled the contract from the envelope, flipped to the last page, and signed his name in a messy, jagged scrawl. He pushed the paper back across the table. "All right, boss," Arthur said, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in a hesitant smirk. "When do I start?" Vivian took the paper, folding it carefully and placing it in her bag. The weight in her chest, the hollow freezing guilt that had plagued her for years, didn't vanish completely, but it eased. "Monday," Vivian said. "And Arthur." "Yeah." "No more duct tape on the company vehicles." Arthur let out a real laugh, a deep, resonant sound that echoed off the greasy walls of Rusty's diner. No promises. They sat there for a while longer, two people from opposite sides of the universe, anchored by a cheap cup of coffee, and the quiet understanding that sometimes a breakdown is the only way to rebuild. What would you do if a random act of kindness changed the entire trajectory of your life? Arthur didn't stop for a reward. He stopped because it was the right thing to do. If this story made you believe in second chances, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist. And subscribe to the channel for more grounded real-life dramas. We drop new stories every week. Don't miss out.